Welcome to the evening review. My name is Sokhane, and joining us in studio is Maximalliant Katjimune of the PDM Youth League. But before we get into that interview, please have a look at the front page. Welcome to the evening review. How are you, Max?
Thank you very much, Ogone, for inviting me, and welcome also to the viewers.
We've seen this week that Parliament has been preoccupied with the reappointment of Mr. Paulus Noah and his deputy Erna van der Merwe at the Anti-Corruption Commission. Why the resistance in your view?
Well, there are a number of very strong arguments and merit to the fact that there are large segments of Namibian society, including my own political party, the PDM, that does not want to accept the reappointment of Mr. Noah. We know that Mr. Noah has not been able to fulfill the mandate of the Anti-Corruption Commission in terms of Section 3 of the ACC Act 8 of 2003. For example, we know that Section 3 of the ACC Act gives the Commission power not only to receive complaints from the public, but it also gives the Anti-Corruption Commission far-reaching powers to initiate its own investigation and investigate allegations of corrupt practices within public institutions and so forth. But what the trend that we've been seeing under Paulus Noah Ogone is that he has not been able to fulfill any of these functions. In fact, there are very worrying reports over the years that Mr. Paulus Noah has in fact blocked the investigation of some allegations of corruption. And even what is more worrying, the reports that we have received, is that investigators within the ACC are forced to wait until Mr. Noah takes a trip overseas so that they can push through some of these investigations in the absence of Mr. Noah. So it actually becomes very clear, Ogone, that the conduct of Mr. Noah is that he has been trying to protect some elements within the state apparatus from being held accountable in terms of corrupt practices within government. A very clear example of this, Ogone, is that Mr. Noah vehemently to follow key discrepancies and allegations of corruption leading up to Fish Road. And that is why people were of the view that perhaps he's protecting some individuals within Fish Road. For example, how many times were allegations surfaced that Saki Shangala paid millions of dollars in alleged payments to genocide lawyers in the UK? I think that amount, it was amounting to about 35 million. These allegations, there was strong merit to these allegations that this indeed did take place. But the ACC, under the auspices of Mr. Paulus Noah and also his deputy, let us not let go of his deputy in this criticism, because they act in common cause. So there was no attempt from them to investigate these allegations at all. And there were also other allegations within Fishco, red flags, that there was improper allocation of fishing quotas within Fishco, that Saki Shangala, Esau, and the James Atukilipi, them were in a sort of a concerted effort to amend the Marine Resources Act and plunder resources within Fishco and within the larger mineral marine fisheries sector in Namibia. But Mr. Paulus Noah failed to inflict the mandate under Section 3 of the ACC Act to investigate these allegations. And that is why we are saying we do not accept the reappointment of Mr. Noah. In fact, the sad thing is that it took other elements of society to expose these things for the ACC to act. For example, when Nangomo took a fish court to court, that is when the allegations of these improprieties started to surface. And then when finally the Fish Road documentary surfaced, and that is when the ACC, because they were now held against the wall, that is when they were forced to act against these acts. But we saw that this was a deliberate effort in the past to not hold individuals that are accused of corruption to account. And that is why we heavily reject the appointment of Paulus Noah to the ACC.
Now, if one pays consideration to the Anti-Corruption Commission Act, the reappointment of Mr. Noah and that of his deputy comes from, the nomination was given by the president, Hage Geingob. What is the way forward? Because it seems like there is a stalemate. The president has given his recommendation, but the National Assembly, obviously those in opposition are fighting against this. What would you say is the best way forward?
Well, we have to, analyze the historical and legal context as to why we have such opposition to the reappointment of Mr. Paulus Noah and his deputy. The strong legal argument, and perhaps the legislature and the executive must look into the provisions that allow a president to unilaterally appoint the director and the deputy director of the ACC and just sort of bulldoze that appointment through the National Assembly. It is very concerning that unlike the appointments of the Prosecutor General and judges and the ECN commissioners, which goes through various processes, for example, judges are interviewed by the Judicial Service Commission, the Prosecutor General is interviewed by the Judicial Service Commission, the Ombudsman is interviewed by the Judicial Service Commission, and then they recommend these appointments to the President. The case is totally different with the Anti-Corruption Commission. The Anti-Corruption Commission, the director and the deputy director, are unilaterally appointed by the president. And we know that our political system, it is such that the appointments are subsequently only bulldozed through the National Assembly because of the majority that the Sobo Party holds. So we have to look into the opposition within that context, that the problem is also with the constitutional framework of how we appoint the head of a very important institution like the Anti-Corruption Commission. We cannot give the president such powerful unilateral powers to appoint whoever he wants without prior processes taking place to that appointment. And I think that is a very big concern that we have, and that is why we are objecting to the appointment of Paulus Noah.
Now, on the issue of, we've seen recently that the Judicial Service Commission shortlisted a few individuals. What does it tell you if only such a low number of individuals were shortlisted to this position?
Well, I don't know whether it is an issue of capacity, but it also speaks to the issue that we are not aware of the processes that go on behind closed doors in terms of the Judicial Service Commission. We do not know how many individuals applied initially and how many were shortlisted, but it is quite a concern that we only have 3 options for the position of the Ombudsman. And that is why the PDM Shadow Minister of Justice, Honorable Timotheus Yumbu, has called for the re-advertisement of the position of Ombudsman, because the Ombudsman really, Ogone, is such an important Chapter 10 institution. I think we ought to have a variety of choices to choose from. I think we have we ought to have a variety of expertise and skills to choose from. And even the quality of the individuals that were chosen, that were shortlisted, it sparks debate across the society, and whether these 3 individuals are really the only 3 individuals that can be appointed to the office of the Ombudsman. So that is why we are calling for the advertisement of the position of Ombudsman.
Now, we've seen recently that President Hage Geingob has appointed yet another technical committee or advisory committee, the one to do with the 4th Industrial Revolution. What are your expectations from this newly appointed advisory body?
Well, we know that our president is a big fan of setting up task forces and high-level panels and committees and advisors and so forth. For example, we had the high-level panel on the Namibian economy. We do not know what happened to the recommendations of that particular panel. We then had the the commission into ancestral land claims. We also do not know what happened to that almost 750-page report of theirs. We now had another one, the Business Rescue Task Force, which is not, it doesn't have very clear terms of reference of how they are going to navigate the issue of solving our economical issues post COVID-19. And now we have these ones about the fourth industrial revolution, which surprisingly is also being headed by a South African. So the president is asking a South African to sort of dissect the unique Namibian circumstances that will propel us to the fourth industrial revolution. Sort of like maybe perhaps we don't have our own experts here that can dissect for us that particular matter. But be that as it may, Ogone, I think we ought to contextualize and dissect the issue of the fourth industrial revolution, because from my point of view, is that this fourth industrial revolution narrative is being pushed down the throat of Africans. Because in 2018, in fact, I had a presentation and I wrote a paper about the fourth industrial revolution, just trying to dissect the first industrial revolution to the fourth industrial revolution. And the critical question that were asked in that paper is that, has Africa even achieved the second industrial revolution to start with? So we cannot be talking about the fourth industrial revolution, while it is very clear that the significant majority of African countries, with the exception of South Africa, which has achieved certain aspects of the second and third industrial revolutions, the significant majority of African countries have not even achieved the second and third industrial revolutions. So now we are trying to propel ourselves from the earlier stages of the second industrial revolution to the fourth industrial revolution, and we are skipping critical steps there in between, when we must be reminded that the industrial revolution, when it started in the city of Birmingham in the 1880s, has gone through numerous stages in the West. The West has gone through the first industrial revolution, they've gone through the second industrial revolution, they've gone through the third, and now they are trying to propel to the fourth and fifth. And there are particular systems and processes that were established during these second and third industrial revolutions. So we must not lie to ourselves to propel ourselves to the fourth industrial revolution, while we have not achieved the systems and processes that ought to have been achieved within the second and third industrial revolution. That is the contextual basis within we must approach this thing. Because the fourth industrial revolution, if rushed too quickly in Africa, has very dire circumstances. The other day I was seeing the emergence of pay yourself cards in supermarkets where we don't need cashiers anymore. That will have a devastating effect on the employment numbers on the African continent, and it's definitely not something that we ought to look into. The issue with the fourth industrial revolution is this: it is a winner takes all era period. It is the indulgence of wealth of the few 1% at the expense of the general unemployment of the masses. And I think we should really evaluate our approach in terms of this conversation and make sure that we follow all the systems and processes that ought to have been established within the past revolutions.
Just to get back to the establishment of this new task force, and you've mentioned the Ancestral Land Commission, you've mentioned the Business Rescue Task Force. Does this not seem to suggest that the president is really willing to consult, he's really willing to hear opinions from outside of government? I mean, does that not indicate to you inclusive governance?
Not at all. I think the president that the current president operates on is very clear. The current president is sort of an optimist. And the sad thing about optimists, unfortunately, or God, is that they fail sometimes to reflect on the general reality of the ground. He seems to create too many commissions and too many panels and too many task forces without clear terms of references. And I don't know whether he does this just to make it look like a feel good and look good exercise in terms of governance and public consultation and so forth. But we saw that the reports coming from these commissions are never really result in any tangible results. And that is why I'm saying I do not think this particular new task force on the fourth industrial revolution will lead to any particular result. And even, by the way, Ogone, when you look at these committees, sometimes you see the people that were appointed to these committees. And some of us know these people personally, although we don't want to mention names. And then you ask yourself, what will this person, what incredible interventions will this person that I know go give in terms of the fourth industrial revolutions and its solutions for Africa? So we also see that there is sort of political appointments with these things and feel good exercises. So it's a gimmick. We do not take it seriously, and we don't think it's going to materialize into anything tangible.
Recently, we saw, now I want to move to student-related issues. Recently, we've been seeing the Namibia Financial Assistant, NASFAF. What we're seeing is now them calling for students to repay back their loans through SMS and so on and so forth. What does that tell you about governance at the fund?
Well, Ogone, as a former student leader, we have been very, very clear and unequivocal in our terms in stating that we are not going to pay a single cent to NASFAF. That is the resolution of all student bodies and youth leagues in this country in terms of paying back NASFAF. We know that the Student Union of Namibia, which I belong to, was founded on a clear-cut agenda of free, quality, and decolonized higher education. We also know further that the Namibia National Student Organization, NANSO, its GSA in 2015, passed Resolution 16, which explicitly called for free, quality, decolonized higher education. Even the new student body, NASA, also calls for the same thing. Even on the SRC bodies that I have served in, the resolution has been very clear that we are not going to pay back NASFAF. And we are further guided by the call by His Excellency the President, which he made in 2015, when we said that all study loans must be turned into grants. And he said that we must not be putting these new fresh graduates into debt. And a strong argument to the president's stating that, because we know that the significant majority of students who are funded by the Namibia Students Financial Assistance Fund are poor, black, marginalized students who have zero generational wealth and are inflicted with generational poverty. So we cannot expect these same students to graduate immediately into debt, because there is an expectation from their families that they will pull their families out of generational wealth, out of generational poverty. There is an expectation, even from the families that they are starting, that they will be able to build some sort of wealth for themselves. So where do we expect these students, these poor, mostly black students, to build enough generational wealth and to pull their families out of generational poverty if we are putting them immediately into debt after graduation? So we are not going to pay back the NASFAF. We have been very unequivocal about that. And even furthermore, and the process of paying back NASFAF is contradictory from the start, because we know that NASFAF has lost records of the students it funded since the 90s. And now, in a quick ditch, in a last ditch effort, they are now trying to only make those students who were funded from 2016 up to now to pay back their loans. So we are not saying that those ones who before 2016 must also be targeted, but we are pointing out the contradictions in these things, that NASFAF has been failing from the start. They lost records of students who they funded already, and we are pointing out these contradictions on how the fund is administratively staffed. And even furthermore, being funded by NASFAF is a headache. NASFAF always has late payments. NASFAF has issues of maladministration in terms of wrong deposits of monies into student accounts. But those are just sideline arguments. Our main argument is that we are poor black students with zero generational wealth who are trying to build our own wealth. Therefore, we are not going to pay back a cent to NASFAF.
A follow-up on this issue for me is you say, and the student bodies and SRC committees have resolved that no NASFAF funding will be paid back. But now, my question is, where do you think future beneficiaries of NASFAF are supposed to get money from?
We have submitted very strong proposals in our consultations with NASFAF, in our consultations with the Ministry of Higher Education, and even in consultations with the Ministry of Finance, that there are sustainable methods that we can take in terms of the funding of NASFAF. One strong argument that has been raised, Ogone, is that the parental annual income threshold for NASFAF is simply too high. When you are applying for NASFAF, one of the requirements is that your parental income, annual income combined, must not exceed 750,000 per annum. That is, in our submissions, too high, because when we are realistically speaking, if both your parents, Ogone, you are the only child, if both your parents are earning 750,000 per annum, in all likelihood and in all realisticness, your parents can afford to pay your higher education. That is one of the submissions we made. For example, the threshold for NASFAS in South Africa is only 350,000 per annum. And that is reasonable. We know that it can be very difficult funding a student from an annual combined parental income of only 350,000. So we have proposed to NASFAF that either that parental income must come down to 350,000 per annum or 250,000 per annum, so that the students who really need the funding get the funding. Some students, in our humble submission, can afford to pay their own higher education if your parents earn 750,000 per annum. Of course, there may be cases where the parent has more than 5 kids, and we can set up special requirements for such situations. But the threshold, number one, must come down, because there are students on the NASFAF funding payroll that can simply afford their own tuition, and there are a lot, and it's leading to the unsustainability of funds. Secondly, we have asked NASFAF to ask the students to make it a choice whether they want only their tuition to be funded and not to be given non-tuition. Because what we see with this 17,000 that is being given free to the students by NASFAF is that the significant majority of the students, of course, they need the money, they use it responsibly, they use it to pay rent and so forth. But there are those students who actually don't need this 17,000. And it ends up, buying other niceties such as some that I don't want to mention here. But it is those few things where they must be given a choice whether they only want the tuition and they don't want to be funded on the non-tuition side, so that we can save money from the non-tuition side. And another call that we have made consistently to NASFAF is that NASFAF must be able to benefit from the vast mineral resources that this nation possesses. And this thing has been echoed across Namibian society, even by prominent politicians, that why don't you give NASFAF a fat big fishing quota from Fishco? Why doesn't NASFAF benefit from mineral resources in the mining industry, from our gold, from our silver, and so forth, so that we can sustainably fund the institution? And when people are talking about the sustainable funding of the institution, they speak like we are talking about excessive amounts of money. The funding that NASFAF needs per year is less than 2 billion Namibian dollars per year. Are we saying that sustainably government cannot fund 2 billion to the higher education sector? That is not a strong argument at all. Our government can afford to fund NASFAF on a sustainable basis every single year, and we have given those interventions that I gave you earlier to ensure that the fund is actually funded on a sustainable basis.
And then last question, very briefly, the issue of youth unemployment. As the youth secretary for your party, what would you say are some of the quick interventions that government can look at to sort of address youth unemployment, ensure that people coming out of institutions of higher learning can be absorbed by the labor market?
Well, youth and graduate unemployment in particular is of a very strong concern to the PDM Youth League and to the entire student and youth leadership establishment in the country. We are now headed towards almost 50% youth unemployment, and that is a very shocking and scaring statistic. It's very shocking and scary in two aspects, Ogone. Number one, it's scary because obviously it has very big economic effects for the country, because you have this vast youth population that is unused human resource capital that cannot build any wealth for themselves, and are contributing absolutely nothing to the tax revenue, and are contributing nothing to the socio and economic upliftment of the country. That's number one. The most scariest part in particular is that you have massive numbers of youth on the street that are growing ever more frustrated with the status quo. And let me remind you, Ogone, that revolutions and conflicts have been started by frustrated, unemployed, and hungry youth across the globe. So we must take this issue very seriously of youth unemployment. A government, any state, cannot afford to have more than 50% of its young population in unemployment. It poses very serious stability dilemmas on the state, because these young people can revolt at any given time. So it's actually a security threat now to the state that you have so many young people that are unemployed, and we can point to many we can point to many examples. Number one, we can point to the example of how Mohamed Bouazizi, a youth in Tunisia, started the Arab Spring because of frustration of the system. We can point to recently just what happened here in our neighboring South Africa, where the arrest of Jacob Zuma sparked mass looting, not only by the adults, but we saw that the youth component was leading this looting, and it is because they are a frustrated big segment of the population who has a lot of energy, and by any spark they can revolt against the state. So we must take this thing very seriously of youth unemployment. And I think government has given lip service to this issue. We have very good policies on the ground in terms of how we want to resolve youth unemployment, but it seems like there's no implementation of this whole issue. And I think it is time to really go back to the drawing table and address this issue holistically and seriously, because it is simply not sustainable from a political science perspective and from a conflict and peace studies perspective to have such a large segment of young people that are frustrated and are sitting at home.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Evening Review. I do look forward to engaging with you once more in future.
Thank you very much, Ogone, and thank you to the viewers.
Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
We were born for this moment. For every rise, every fall, to make the impossible possible. To create moments that inspire and live the thrill of excellence.
On the grandest stage of all.
Forget the past, for the future awaits. This is that moment we've all been waiting for pride, for country, for you.
Brilliant performance that was.
The Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. It's go time on GoTV. Love it.
MTC Master Chief Team Ekanjo. Of course, we currently watching the Tokyo Olympics 2020, where our athletes are represented. Let's not forget that MTC has already sponsored Christine Boma and Beatrice Masilingi as well, who are also part of this Olympics. Mr. Kanjo, I just wanted to hear from you what you think of the Olympics, its value as well.
Well, the Olympics is obviously the mega competition in the world. Obviously happening in very strange times, you know what COVID has done to the world. But we have 11 athletes here. We're hoping for the best. We are reminded of the time of Frankie Fredericks. This time we have Boma and Masilingi and so many other athletes. I think this is probably the Olympics where we say Namibia is going to stand the very, very best chance of bringing back medals, and we're hoping for the best. And of course, wish the Namibian team all the best in their participation in this Olympics.
Okay, from yourself as an individual, which sport do you always look forward to when watching the Olympics?
Well, any sports court, whether it is athletics, whether it is javelin, whether it is high jump, everything excites me. As long as we can bring back medals. At the end of the day, it's about the medals.
I thought you were a 400-meter athlete, and you probably can't wait always to watch the 400 meters.
Yeah, the 400 is always very exciting because there's like 4 different intervals that you have to watch out, especially at the 10s. But 200 meters also very exciting. 100 meters, of course, very, very quick. But we're looking forward to, especially to athletics this Olympics.
In terms of having okay, we know that Namibia is there, it's a country, and of course it's always your first choice, regardless of anything. Do you have any other country that you always like to watch, or athletes from a country that you always like to see throughout the years?
Well, except for Namibia, I'm rooting for any African country on the continent. We hope that Africa will do well and bring back a lot of medals. South Africa is right, our neighbors, Botswana, our neighbors, and all the neighboring countries. But any African country, we're looking forward to a lot of medals from countries like Ethiopia, Kenya in long distance. But we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Of course, one last one before we close. Who is your favorite ever Olympic athlete?
It has to be Frankie Fredericks. I think second in line will be our brothers and sisters from Ethiopia and Kenya, and then of course also the 400 meter all-time sprinter. We know who that is, and of course Mr. Bolt as well.
All right.
Big ups to him for what he has done for Jamaica.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.